1978. In a Norwegian fjord, Americans are doing a world record dive. A dive that will make Norway incredibly rich. But deep down, everything goes wrong.
Unfortunately, I was the last one to see him alive.
How did this dive become a success at the surface?
Det gikk over lik.
What happened with the investigation?
Vi har ikke lydopptak på de siste 10 minutter rett før ulykken skjedde.
"37 years later, we will meet those affected. 3 children will for the first time find out what happened to their father. For all these years, John Call has carried the blame and the truth about what happened.
I would like to talk to his son to tell him what happened.
I could live the rest of my life and not meeting him.
New Orleans, once the center of deep-sea diving. Here, 10 divers trained for more than a year to do what they called the Norwegian job. John Call has a world record he doesn't like to talk about, but it's all there in his old logbook.
On February 1st, we reached depth of 1,000 feet. On the 2nd, have a lot of nervous energy all day, anticipating that first, which should be early tomorrow morning.
They were going down to the bottom of the Skåneviks fjord on the western coast of Norway. John Call had volunteered to dive all the way down to 320 meters.
Well, at the time when you're 20 years old, you don't really think of the consequences. I was mostly thinking of the money. That you get paid, the deeper you go, the more you make.
Brian Pitari was also on the dive.
I think we'll find 2 gauges and a diving suit.
It has been in a warehouse by the Mexican Gulf for a long time.
Oh, probably 25 years, at least. That's why I'm hoping it's all still there.
Both of them worked for one of the world's leading diving companies, Taylor Diving, who had gotten the job in Norway.
I couldn't wait to do it. The more you got into it, I knew it was a very important job, not only for the company, Taylor, but it was a very important job for Norway because it was going to open up your oil fields for you.
Helikopteret med statsminister Bratteli landet på Gulf Tide i formiddag.
In 1971, the Ekofisk field opened. For the first time, Norway got oil from the North Sea.
Denne dagen kan bli en merkedag I vår økonomiske historie.
But all the oil and gas was brought ashore in England and Germany. Norway missed out on jobs and petroleum industry. The problem was the Norwegian Trench, a barrier more than 300 meters deep.
Det da klart at det vel neppe noen som mer interessert I å få alle de forhold klarlagt som knytter seg til dette å krysse norske renn enn norske myndigheter.
A united parliament voted to bring oil and gas from future fields across the trench to Norway. But did they know how difficult this was, technically? The oil companies got the challenge.
Norsk Hydro satte I 1974 I gang en omfattende studie for å utrede mulighetene for å bygge og vedlikeholde en rørledning fra Frigg-området over Norskerenna til Norge.
There was barely technology to lay pipes at these depths. No one in the world had a technology to repair them. In 1976, Statoil too began to plan a pipeline. There was not much time. The two oil companies decided to cooperate on an experiment. They found the expertise in the USA.
Med Taylor Diving Salvage Company som ansvarlig for alle undervannsarbeider, og Brown & Root Offshore som hovedentreprenør, vi nå klare for det avgjørende forsøket i full skala.
The most expensive dive ever. Norway's future was at stake. It had to be a success. But it all depended on 10 men being able to work at the bottom of the sea. David Hoover was one of the divers. He used to write to his wife. For the first time, the children read these letters to understand what happened in Norway.
This is January 24, 78. They had some safety men from Norway asking all the divers about emergency procedures. Men go up in space and risk their lives, so I guess men can go to the bottom of the ocean and risk our lives. So I look at this as just another job. Anything that would happen on this job could happen on any other job as well. So it does no good to worry about it. If I did, I would most probably give up diving.
Their mother died in 2006. The letters were her secret. She never talked about what happened to their father.
So my mother never remarried. She believed that you get one person.
After the last bell run, I told them I wanted out. I'm just close to the breaking point.
What did actually happen in the fjord? January 1978. This barge was equipped in Rotterdam. John Call and the other divers made their last preparations before departure to Norway.
Den blir derfor senket ned I sjøen og undersøkt av en dykker.
Oh, yes, I did. I remember that now. I had to make a dive in Rotterdam. That was me.
Is that you?
Yes.
The project was filmed.
I had to crawl on the spa. What was I doing? I'm trying to remember now. But all the other ones were out drinking. For some reason, I was there. They said, get over here.
At 320 meters at the bottom of the fjord, the divers would cut pipes and place them in a frame and then into a welding habitat. Afterwards, inside the habitat, they would inflate balloons in the pipes. These would stop water from coming into the welding chamber. The habitat would then be emptied for water and the divers could weld in a dry atmosphere. A unique project. The aim was to prove that the pipes could be repaired in the Norwegian trench. If they succeeded, Norway could bring oil and gas ashore.
We went through quite a few safety drills and safety training. We sat through several classes.
Alle dykkerne har sveisesertifikat fra det norske Veritas.
There's John, George. There's Dave. To contemplate going that deep underwater was just something, it's almost mind-boggling to think, I'm going to be 1,000 feet under the ocean. You're doing something that very few people in the world have ever done.
The Americans set course for the fjord in western Norway.
On January 31st, we finally went into SAT. We reached a depth of 460 feet on January 31st.
Dykkesystemet består av et trykkammer, dykkerklokke og kontrollrom.
The pressure in the saturation chamber on deck was slowly adjusted to the pressure on 320 meters. Air was changed for a breathable mixture of helium and oxygen. The bell was the lift to the work site at the bottom. So they were now at 320 meters, whether resting in the chamber on deck or working at the bottom of the sea. It would take 11 days to bring the divers back to normal pressure.
Looking out the portholes at the fjord, we couldn't believe that we were that close to land. You know, you'd look out of a little hole and you could see land. I mean, when you look out there and you see a mountain and you're sitting not very far from the mountain, you're going, how can we be at 1,000 feet? The sun was shining. I remember that, looking out and seeing the mountains. It was very beautiful. Made the first bell run on February 3rd, and the depth was 1,065 feet. Going outside the bell, I can still remember touching down on the bottom, and I thought to myself, this is the first time that anybody ever stepped right here. It's like walking on the moon. You know, how can you describe that? It's something very special.
It was quite a scary thing the first time getting out of the bell, and of course it was awestruck, just like, oh wow, look at where you are, and it was quite exciting.
Almost too exciting. The first task for Brian Pitari was to remove concrete coating from the pipe. But when he realized he was at 320 meters, he became terrified.
My heart was pounding so hard. I just took my hammer and I was just hitting the pipeline so they could hear noise happening. But then after that, it was get down, let's get the job. But yes, at first it was like, okay, I need a few minutes here.
The pressure to succeed was immense. It was a time of crisis. Norway had a huge foreign debt. 5 years earlier, there had been an international oil crisis, petrol rationing, and driving bans.
Karl Johans gate her I Oslo vanligvis en av landets mest trafikkerte gater. Men nå I ettermiddag, litt over klokken 3, kan vi altså stå her midt I gaten uten noen trafikk rundt oss.
The oil crisis led to a crisis in one of Norway's main industries, shipping.
For få år siden ville ingen tro at en skulle kunne stå på dekket på en tankbåt og kjenne fjøslukt.
In Norwegian fjords, the tankers were laid up. That led to a crisis in Norway's many shipyards. No one ordered new vessels. Politicians, unions and industries wanted oil and gas ashore.
Til sammen vil det bli ilandført 30 millioner tonn olje fra Statfjordfeltet.
Plans were made to change the country.
I tillegg til dette kommer store mengder med våtgass.
But first they had to lay a pipeline across the Norwegian trench, and 10 American divers had to prove it could be repaired. The future of Norway depended on their success.
Communications were bad. The ride up, they had problems with the winch, so it took a while to get up. From the first dive on that job, we were having difficulties with all the equipment. Nothing seemed to work properly all the time.
And the problems continued on the next shift. Several hoses brought breathing gas and hot water down to the divers for them to breathe and keep warm. But now the hot water disappeared.
At that depth and that water temperature, when you lose hot water, you have approximately 3 minutes to get back into the safety of the bell because you will freeze to death.
And the hot water failed several times on each shift.
It stops work. So for us, it was very frustrating, tiring.
And the problem could not be solved as they had no extra pump for hot water on the barge. The Labour Inspectorate was on board. They had followed the project for years and had approved the dive. But the man in charge had fallen ill and someone else from the Labour Inspectorate was sent on board. He was only allowed in the break room and knew little of how the divers were doing.
Down there, you're almost breathing a liquid because that gas is so thick and so heavy. It's just very labored breathing, so you're very conscious of your breathing all the time.
February 7th, Brian Pittari was going down for the third time. They were almost finished installing the equipment. The pipes were ready for welding in the habitat. Brian Pittari and his team were inserting balloons called pigs in the pipes. The gas pressure was controlled from the barge.
Gas coming down, Randy. Gas coming down, Brian. Stop.
And what I should have heard was the gas going in, something in the nature of like shh, just a nice slow filling. Instead of that, it was and I immediately started to push off from the Whitey valve. And I didn't even get that far and the pig blew. That's how much pressure was going into the pig. I remember thinking I could feel wetness on my face, and I had held my breath because I didn't know if I had a faceplate. So then, okay, it's okay to take a breath. And then I thought, well, you're probably pretty messed up. The next thing I know, I'm being pulled out of the pipeline. And that was Randy pulling me out. Come to find out later on, the wetness I felt was my eardrums were blown out and they had bled. So that was the moisture that I felt on my face and not my faceplate blowing out. So at this point, of course, Randy's talking more to topside. They're making sure, Brian, are you okay? And I don't know if I'm okay, but I'm here. It sounded like you were in a big tunnel, you know, but with the eardrums burst. It was, to me, it was like you were just in a huge echo chamber.
Brian Pittari believes he still has the pressure gauge.
Maybe in. And there we go.
The instrument was damaged in the accident.
But there was so much pressure even to the needle just, and it's only thin metal, it skipped over both of the pegs. Because it was instantaneous. It would only take a second to look away and not see it.
On the barge, nobody kept an eye on the gauge when the gas was sent down to the balloon.
This is my old hot water suit. Taylor diving.
The bell returned to the surface. Brian Pittari was battered, dazed, and his ears hurt. But he got no medical attention.
Back in the chamber, it was over 2 hours before I was physically examined.
He still has the complaint he wrote to the company afterwards.
This seems to be a grave lack of concern for the diver's health on the part of Taylor Diving and Salvage.
The priority was to send new divers down.
Keep it going 24/7.
The team that was sent down in a hurry was Mike Cook, John Cole, and David Hoover. One man controlled the supply of breathing gas to the divers. He worked 12-hour shift. The margins were tight. John Cole was inside the pipe, whilst David Hoover watched the instruments. Then the hot water supply stopped again. They had to return to the bell.
I started crawling back outside the pipe, and at that point when I came outside the pipe, I looked over, standing inside the habitat. I saw my partner. Well, he looked at me and he gave me the thumbs up, and, I gave him the thumbs up and I was out of the pipe. Everything was fine, and we're headed back to the bell. At that point, I noticed that my hose was hung up on a line. I asked topside if I could cut myself to get back to the bell faster. They said, no, you cannot cut the line, so they wanted me to untangle myself. My partner had left the habitat at that point. I noticed that my air pressure had dropped. And I just tried to take a breath and I couldn't breathe anymore. It was just all of a sudden, just very quick.
There was gas at the top of the welding habitat, but it was not considered breathable.
I was standing there not being able to breathe. So I was hoping that there was enough oxygen in that atmosphere.
He took a chance, tore his mask off, and took a couple of deep breaths.
I think it was about a minute, but they say it was about 2 minutes.
So he waited for gas to return to his mask.
When I was convinced that there was enough gas, I put my hat back on and I went outside the bell outside the habitat to go back to the bell.
John Cole was lucky and survived.
Topside was trying to get a hold of Dave. I heard him over the radio. Dave, where are you? Dave, why aren't you answering? At that point, they asked me, where's Dave? Did you see him back at the bell yet? I said, no, I'm headed that way. And when I noticed that my hose was hooked with Dave's. So I knew they were trying to get a hold of Dave, so I wondered why. So I followed his hose back. Excuse me a second. Following his hose back, I did get to the bottom, and I saw his foot. I grabbed his foot and grabbed Dave. At that point, I looked in his eyes, and he wasn't there. It was just in his eyes. There was no reaction. His eyes were gone. I immediately climbed up my hose back to the top of the spa, and I dragged him back up there. And from there, we were able to get him back to the bell.
They started CPR, and the bell started the ascent.
The bell run up was very long. It seemed like it took forever. I remember trying to give him some chest compressions. They told me to slow down with my chest compressions. I was just so excited. As soon as I found him, I knew he was gone. But I don't know what else to do. You got to try everything, and you try everything.
David Hoover was brought into the deck chamber, and others continued the CPR.
They, at that point, had some drugs inside the chamber. I think they did give him some injections. I wasn't involved in that. I just sat in the bell and cried.
At 11:52 p.m. on February 7th, David Hoover was pronounced dead. He was decompressed and taken out of the chamber in 8 hours. Normally, it should have taken 11 days. It was quiet inside the chamber, but not on the outside.
We knew all hell had broken loose. But being so isolated, you don't know really what's going on.
Meter under oss her ble den 28 år gamle amerikanske dykkeren David Hoover funnet bevisstløs klokka 22:30 i går natt. Det var 2 av hans ledsagere som fant ham på bunnen, og sammen med de 2 ble han straks brakt opp i trykkammer.
The Labour Inspectorate had been on board the whole time. Now, the local sheriff was called. The investigation started.
Alle som hadde hatt noe med ulykken å gjøre, eller med dykkerarbeid å gjøre ombord på lekteren, ble bedt om å avgi en skriftlig rapport.
Also, Svein Eidsvik was summoned.
På det tidspunktet der så var det også tynt med dykkerekspertise I Norge.
He was an expert in diving medicine and had been consulted during the planning of the dive.
Stemningen ombord, den var ikke god. Han var preget av usikkerhet og overraskelse, da må jeg si. Det var ikke noen som hadde regnet med det.
Hva gjorde dere?
Nei, vi snakket da med de som var innblandet I disse her greiene, så godt som vi kunne, og skrev ned disse her forhørene.
But something was not right. The Americans did audio and video recordings of the whole dive. But where were the tapes? The missing recordings were a topic in a documentary in 1979.
På dette dykkerulykka hendte, der viste seg at lydbandet var utspilt ca. 10 minutter før ulykka. Så vi hadde ikke lydbandopptak på de siste 10 minutter rett før ulykka skjedde.
Og under ulykka heller ikke?
Nei.
Den teipen som vi da var avhengig av, der hadde de glemt, og så trykket jeg på den knappen for recording. Og så hadde de trykt feil knapp, det var en annen forklaring. De hadde trykt på playback I stedet for recording. Og en tredje forklaring da var at de hadde glemt å sette teipen på, han gikk ikke. Og en tredje eller fjerde forklaring da var at han som tok teipen ut av kassetten, visste ikke egentlig akkurat hva det var, så han ble forlagt og var ute av systemet. Om han kom til rette siden, da vet jeg ikke. Men jeg hører ikke på han.
Hva tenker du at det var 4 forskjellige forklaringer?
Nei, det var grundigt, og med 4 forskjellige forklaringer, veldig grundigt. I alle fall når det var samme mann som ga, de hadde vært 4 forskjellige som ga forklaringer, så hadde du kanskje ikke reagert så mye på det.
The sheriff and the labor inspectorate were doing separate investigations. Eidsvik was a consultant for both of them. He flew to Bergen to attend the autopsy. But no one had ever performed an autopsy on a body from a depth of 320 meters. CO2 poisoning. This was the explanation that reached the public. David Hoover's beard had made the mask leak, and he was poisoned by the CO2 he exhaled. In other words, he caused his own death. But in the official autopsy report from the medical examiner, there was no mention of CO2 at all. And John Call explained that he suddenly lost all breathing gas. What was going on? It was crowded at the autopsy. In addition to 2 experienced medical examiners, another 2 wanted to be present.
Og så var der en kar fra Taylor Diving. Da så jeg husker, og han var så veldig nøye på, husker jeg, og gikk og maste på at vi skulle sende rekning på denne jobben, men det sånn som du ikke gjør I Norge. Rettsmedisinske obduksjoner, det staten sitt anleggende. Og jeg ble ikke kjent med han, men han var så rundt og tok mye bilder og sånn. Og hvor han ble jo, da vet jeg ikke. Og så en som het Jan Calder, han var fra England, veldig rutinert rettsmedisiner og patolog, og han hadde vi med, for han var interessert I eventuelle skader på indre ører på dypdykkere, for han drev og forsket på det der.
Eidsvik was educated in the USA and Great Britain. He knew Dr. Calder to be an authority.
Du veldig, veldig lojal for lære seg til det. Du gjør stort sett sånn som paven sier.
And it was Dr. Calder who came up with the theory of CO2 poisoning. And that was the explanation the Labour Inspectorate believed. They wrote that Dr. Calder strongly expressed CO2 as cause of death.
Han var nog lite mer bastant än dig I sin konklusion, Calder.
Ja, han var bastant. Det var han. Jeg tok ikke opp noen diskusjon.
But Dr. Calder was not an independent scientist and pathologist. He worked for an institute hired by Taylor Diving. He wrote an interpretation of the autopsy for the diving company. But Dr. Calder did not reveal this when he participated in the autopsy.
Nei. Den der at Calder var kalt inn av Taylor, da hadde ikke jeg anet sånn.
Burde han sagt til dere at han jobbet for Taylor?
Hva?
Burde han sagt at han jobbet for?
Ja, visst pokker skulle han sagt da. Og da hadde han jo blitt hevet ut lådbrett.
Inge Morild was back then assistant resident at the Forensic Institute.
Jeg var sikkert I rommet ved siden av, men jeg fikk ikke være med.
Today he's in charge of the institute. We ask him to assess Dr. Calder's conclusion of CO2 poisoning against a cutoff of breathing gas.
Egentlig så blir det ikke så veldig store forskjeller på funnene ved et dødsfall som følge av CO2-narkose, som ved et oksygenmangel dødsfall. Det kan være samme type funn, faktisk.
Vil det være mulig å se en mulig CO2-forgiftning på blodprøver tatt av likhet?
Nei, det vil jeg ikke. Så man har ingen sikre metoder til å fastslå hverken det ene eller det andre.
But there is more that does not add up. The medical examiners behind the official autopsy report wrote that the cause of death could not be lack of oxygen. Therefore, no cut in breathing gas, like John Call experienced.
Når det gjelder dette med at det kan fastslås at det ikke fantes tegn til svikt I oksygentilførsel, så synes jeg at det litt vel bastant. Jeg mener at man kan ikke si det så sikkert som det gjøres her. En akutt svikt kunne medført de forandringene I kroppen som vi ser her.
But in 1978, Dr. Calder's theory on self-inflicted CO2 poisoning became the truth. Did someone benefit from this explanation? In the North Sea, new fields were ready for development. Oil and gas worth billions waiting to be brought up. The clock was ticking for a Norwegian pipeline and Norwegian oil industry. But now, everything could stop.
Kan det som nå har hendt få konsekvenser for spørsmålet om ilandføring?
For det første har jeg ikke kjennskap til hva som førte frem til denne ulykken. For det andre har jeg ikke noe grunnlag for å ha noen mening om hvorvidt forsøket kan fortsette.
For the government, everything depended on the investigation. If the death was caused by insufficient technical solutions, the dream of bringing oil and gas ashore had to be postponed. On the barge, the divers were still in saturation. On the bottom were equipment worth millions. The top management of Taylor Diving and Brown & Root flew in from USA, London and Rotterdam.
And I do remember just seeing, a lot of people moving around and running around outside. The whole chamber was quiet, and I think everybody was just thinking about their own thoughts, and this would certainly be a stopper, because if someone died as Dave did, you absolutely need to know the cause so it doesn't happen to someone else again.
And they believed that some CO2 had gotten through his mask by way of his beard. But at that point, I don't think there was anybody in the chamber that really believed that. We just know that they knew that I had lost gas and I was in the habitat, and that's why I'm here.
Ombord I denne svære lekteren har det vært stillstand siden dødsulykken her natt til onsdag.
The Labour Inspectorate came to the village to investigate the accident. They were regarded the experts and worked independently to the police.
Som jeg nevnte, så har vi jo ikke ulykkesårsaken helt klar enda.
The man that had been in charge of the diving project in the Labour Inspectorate was now also in charge of the investigation. The recordings from the dive would give crucial information. Were they really missing? The diving company claimed they were.
Men ikke det uforsvarlig under et såpass krevende eksperiment?
Lydbåndet kan ikke hedde noen dykker. Det kan ha en viss betydning for etterforskningen etterpå, det er derfor vi har bedt om at det skal være lydbåndopptak. Men under dykket har det jo egen misjon.
Nå ble ikke dette lydbåndet for langt framlagt heller. Hvorfor ikke?
Ja, når dykkerlederne fra Taylor fortalte meg at det ikke hadde vært noe opptak, så intuitivt så følte jeg at de snakket sant. Og jeg gikk da videre i etterforskningen.
Og de godtok deres muntlige forklaring, altså?
Ja. Vel, det er veldig sterkt press under en slik etterforskning, om man skiller mellom vesentlig og vesentlig, og jeg hadde så absolutt inntrykk at de snakket sant.
The Labour Inspectorate were now investigating what went wrong in a dive they had planned, approved and monitored.
Vi stopper hvis vi finner at personen ikke er forsvarlig.
But the problems with communication, hot water and the explosion that hurt Pitari had not resulted in the dive being stopped. In addition, the Labour Inspectorate had another problem. During the dive they gave this dispensation. David Hoover, John Call and the other divers dived without emergency gas. He that made the equipment do not understand why.
But he didn't have bailout bottle?
He did not, I don't know.
No, nobody had.
Why? We got them ready. They were built out of stainless steel.
The Labour Inspectorate wrote they were unnecessary because they would last a very short time at this depth.
We had the stainless steel specially made. There were twin cylinders, very, very expensive to have fabricated. It's a twin pack.
How long would the bailout bottle last?
Certainly enough for him to have gotten back to the bell.
More than 2 seconds?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Should have been at least a few minutes.
The emergency gas could have saved David Hoover.
I think that was a protocol that should not have been overlooked. Nobody, I mean, that's mandatory.
The Labour Inspectorate had thus breached regulations they knew well. This is their copy. It says the emergency gas would last for 3 minutes. On the 10th of February, Norsk Hydro and Statoil decided to stop the experiment out of consideration for the divers. But Taylor Diving wanted to bring the expensive equipment up. They applied to the Labour Inspectorate for permission.
Også for å få den dispensasjonen så måtte vi jo få den selvfølgelig fra arbeidstilsynet på høyeste level.
Vil de tillate dette?
Da husker jeg stod på siden av Vinsnes når vi snakket med han, og da sa han da at hvis det går galt dette, så måtte han ta sin hatt og frakk og gå, sa han. Hvis han da måtte ta sin hatt og frakk og gå så høyt level, så spør ikke det for regjeringen. Så det var heavy sak, altså.
The permission was granted. Meanwhile, the sheriff worked on his investigation.
Har de, noen utdannelse når det gjelder dykking, slik at de kan ta stilling til tekniske og fagmessige problemer her?
Absolutt ikke.
But he was an experienced policeman. He had the logbooks from Taylor Diving and Norsk Hydro, as well as handwritten statements from the crew and divers. John Call said he lost all breathing gas. At the same time, David Hoover lost consciousness and died. He saw a pattern. The logbooks and statements from the barge show that there were problems with the gas supply to the divers. The chain of events seemed clear, but he could not question anyone. The Labour Inspectorate had decided that barge could return to Rotterdam, so all the witnesses disappeared to sea before the investigation was finished.
I guess the last one we have is right at February 6, 78, which he died on February 7th.
This letter was written by his father the day before he died.
Give me a second.
I'm over here and making all this money for you to be spending on baby clothes. I think it's a boy. Well, he was wrong.
David was only 6 years old, Jennifer 2, and little sister Kylie not yet born. The letters from their father give a glimpse into a world they have never known.
You can't move fast. Your respiration can't handle it. And if you overwork your system, it's hard to get it back under control. I did it last night when I went out of the bell. and I had to stop, slow down my breathing before I passed out.
The dive in Norway would be his last, but it was only this letter that came home.
It says, take care, you beautiful creature. Don't do anything like hard work or lifting heavy objects. You're almost 30, remember? Haha. You're as pretty now as you were when I met you. Watch what you're doing. Tell the kids hello for me. And I miss you very much. Surprised she didn't have that one framed or something if that's the last letter.
I'm surprised she didn't destroy the one about killing the cat.
She killed the cat.
Through the letters, Jennifer meets her father for the first time. She was too young to remember him alive.
Finally, I got to see that, I didn't know him, but yet he knew me in just the 2 years, and to see little stories and little nicknames he would give me. Finally, I felt like there was a connection that I've never had.
They were probably writing 2 or 3 letters a day, and then probably every week. And pretty much every letter has a sexual type tone to it, so it's a little odd reading at it with your parents discussing this type of things. Well, don't be worrying about me. If you are, can't read that.
I always knew my mom loved him that much that, she never remarried again or moved on in that sense. But now I can have a little bit more insight to see that it was the soulmate. It was the once-in-a-lifetime person that they were able to find each other, and that doesn't usually happen for most people, I think.
Everything's so messed up, hectic, irritating. I'll sure be glad when we're finished. I sure miss being with you.
All my mom or my grandma would tell us is that he died while welding underwater, that he was a deep-sea diver in Norway, and there was an accident, and he had drowned. And that was it. I asked a few times and got the same answer, very short and to the point. I think I was still aware at a young age that my mom didn't want to talk about it.
They were told that John Cole was to blame.
When I was in high school, I was very angry, very aggressive, and I think I was always kind of the opposite of what my father was. And I guess it just had to be with growing up without a strong male presence, in the house.
Only David is old enough to remember anything from the day it happened.
When it actually happened, the only memory I have was I can remember something came on the news. But I remember somebody getting up, turning the TV off, and shutting the thing. So apparently it was something about the dive that came on. But I don't, up until probably that night when I was in the room, one of them came that night and told me.
They never knew anything about what happened in Norway, only who was to blame.
From what my mother and my grandmother would always say, there was an issue with the dive, but that the diver that was with my father, John Cole, it was their understanding that he had panicked.
That is the truth they know. That a terrified John Cole did not dare to save their father. On the other side of New Orleans, John Cole wants to tell his version.
I would like to talk to his son to tell him what happened. I think it might be beneficial for both of us, but I can understand his feelings.
I could live the rest of my life without meeting him, but nothing against him, personally, because I don't know him. But I think there was a lot of dirty hands at Taylor, and when you're talking about that much money for everybody involved.
Taylor Diving said they were going back to Rotterdam, but instead they set course to the west, destination Scotland. They had decided to move the dive. Norsk Hydro came on board again, even though they officially had stopped the project out of concern for the divers. John Call and the others could not leave the saturation chamber. The dive was not finished.
Those days moving to Scotland were the quietest I can ever remember a chamber. It was very quiet, very somber, but we knew we had a job to do, and we were going to do it. We knew it was an important job, a very exciting job. So at being a 20-year-old kid, we can do it. And we did it.
Brian Pitari was still in a daze. He has to look in a logbook to remember.
Pain, right shoulder. I told you they gave me, I've forgotten, I had read these too, that I knew they gave me some sort of pills. See, that's why I'm sleeping, a concussion, I'm just...
2 weeks after the accident, he was sent to hospital in Scotland.
Royal Aberdeen Infirmary.
But the other divers were going down again. The operation in Scotland was simplified. The equipment was pre-prepared. They would just weld the pipes together.
To have your diving partner die on you, I was very frightened. I was very nervous, but I was very determined at the same time.
The dive started and continued as before, with problems.
March 1st, Pat and I went down. The next run, George and Ed went down. George jumped out and started smelling some bad gas. They refused to dive. Came up and had conference. Then Randy said he would not dive. I said I would not dive.
But they went down again.
Tony had trouble. Had plenty of air, but something got to him. Jerry and Pat went down, and they had trouble getting to the habitat, so they came back up.
They welded for 2 days at more than 300 meters depth. The last shift lasted 12 hours. Then the divers were done. 11 days later, they could leave the saturation chamber.
And finally, on March 15th, 1978, we reached the surface at 1100 hours, Freedom Day.
But they never performed a realistic repair of a pipeline at 320 meters. In Norway, they never completed the installation of the equipment. In Scotland, they just did a weld on pre-prepared equipment. But the project had to be a success. It was a time of Cold War. The Soviet Union offered cheap gas to Europe and were building a new pipeline from Siberia. There was a huge demand for gas. But could Europe be dependent on the enemy? Norway had to be able to build a pipeline ashore and start production of gas, or else Europe had no choice. But in a small office, the sheriff's conclusion created a problem. He concluded the cause of the accident was technical failure. The divers did not get enough breathing gas. He sent his conclusion to the regional police department and the public prosecutor. But the Labour Inspectorate also submits a conclusion. There were no problems with the gas supply. There were no connection between Cole's breathing problems and Hoover's death. The cause of death was self-inflicted CO2 poisoning. The regional police department and the public prosecutor reviewed both reports for 3 months. They questioned no one and did no further investigations. Today, both the public prosecutor and the regional police decline commenting on their work. In July 1978, the case was closed. The public prosecutor based his decision on trust. He meant the Labour Inspectorate had more knowledge and credibility than the local sheriff. But what really happened when David Hoover died? 37 years later, a new review of witness statements, logbooks and documents show that the sheriff was on the right track. After the accident, John Horn was sent to the barge by Taylor Diving. He has no doubt that the sheriff was right.
And this says it all. In conclusion, the cause of the accident may be assumed to be connected in some way with the fault in the gas mixing equipment, since diver Cole also had problems at the same time when diver Hoover lost his life. And it was at this time that the fault in the mixing equipment occurred. Spot on.
A pump to the gas supply failed and the pressure dropped. The divers did not get any breathing gas. The operator then opened a valve to another gas supply, but the valve was a new type and did not work as it used to.
Small difference in operation, but a major, major difference in operation. The brass valves, you could open the stem and you get an immediate flow of gas. On the 12 MBF8s, the stem would have to be opened usually a full turn and a half to allow any gas to be passed through the valve.
The pressure was so low that no gas came down to the divers. They could not breathe. And the valve for the new gas supply was probably not fully opened. John Cole could tear his mask off in the welding habitat, whilst David Hoover, who was outside, did not stand a chance. For 37 years, the Hoover family has lived with another version, that John Cole panicked and did not dare to save their father. Now they learn what actually happened.
So he tries to entangle himself when he suddenly can't breathe.
We explained a chain of events.
So he takes off his mask.
And what John Cole actually did.
This is a very dangerous thing to do.
Very dangerous, because you don't know if you can breathe the air.
No,
there was a gas cut.
It's a gas cut.
But it was quick, right?
Yeah.
They get to see all the investigation papers with the logbooks and statements.
This is what they wrote right after?
Yeah.
It's amazing.
They read about John Cole's struggle to get their father back to the bell.
Which I'm sure it's no small feat moving somebody around at that depth and what they're going across.
About desperate attempts to revive him despite knowing it's too late. This is not a John Cole panicking.
I'm kind of pissed off right now anyway, so I need to go find my happy place. So.
What do you think about meeting John Cole?
I don't know.
I'm okay with it. I mean, I feel better now that I've heard the other story, seen, I guess, what's probably the real version. I always like meeting somebody that knows my dad, and so I have no problem with that. It's up to you, David.
In Norway, the dive was deemed a success. The dream of bringing oil and gas ashore could come true. And the case was closed 5 months after the accident. Former diver Jan Warlow has never accepted the official truth. And now he discovers something strange.
Der har vi det avsnittet. Når vi ser det på, jeg har ikke sett det på papir før, men jeg kan se det her på skjermen, at det jo manipulert her.
Part of this official document has been changed.
Her det gjort et eller annet, og skrevet antageligvis over.
But what has been removed? In 1978 he was a union man and followed diving accidents closely.
Så det vel medisinsk uforsvarlig å utsette folk for slike operasjoner.
He did not trust the investigators.
Arbeidstilsynet var jo kontrollinstans, som jeg hadde vært i clinch med før, flere år i forveien, i forbindelse med dødsulykker. I 74 særlig. Så jeg sa at dette her kan gå gærent. Med etterforskning og alt mulig.
And then he got to hear a rumor.
Og så til slutt så kom det. De dykket uten bailout. De dykket uten reservegass. Og det jeg trodde ikke hva jeg hørte. Jeg trodde faktisk ikke på hva jeg hørte.
He demanded to see all the documents connected to the investigation. He wrote letters demanding access, and finally he succeeded. He was allowed to read what the Labour Inspectorate had written.
Når vi fikk dette, så var det helt åpenbart at dette var feil. Det var masse feil, mangler.
Jan Warloe and Anne Jentoft were in different unions. None of them believed the report.
Vi hadde jo ønsket at hele den saken hadde blitt tatt opp igjen, og at alle punktene ble skikkelig belyst.
Arne Jentoft got to meet the Director of Public Prosecutions and spoke his mind.
Og så sa jeg, ja, la meg si det på den måten. Da sa jeg, hadde dette en rapport som du fikk fra flyhaverikommisjonen, så hadde du hevet han rett i bosset. Det er et makkverk, sa jeg. Og da skjedde noe forunderlig. Han reiste seg opp, og han ble ildrød i ansiktet, og øynene begynte å bule på han. Han gikk 2-3 ganger rundt skrivebordet sitt og brummet. Og så jeg bort på de 2 karene fra LO, advokaten og han andre, og de så ut så de ville helst grave seg et hull og forsvinne i.
And then the meeting was over. There was no new police investigation, but a commission was to investigate the Labour Inspectorate. They were to evaluate how the Inspectorate had conducted the investigation of the accident, and divers from the unions were summoned.
Og vi satt der, og vi kom med våre syn på dette her. Og så ventet vi på at noe skulle skje med denne her greia, og det gikk vinter og vår.
The commission also summoned medical experts. One of them was Svein Eidsvik. But he had participated in the investigation that a committee was set to investigate.
I prinsippet så skal man ikke være med og granske seg selv, men erfaringen min her i kongeriket at det skjer noe rett, så er det at man er med og gransker seg selv, men det er ikke god tid.
Ja, så du vil ikke være med?
Nei.
The committee consisted of board members and the director of the Labour Inspectorate. It was the Labour Inspectorate's work and role they were to investigate. And they would send their conclusion to themselves for final processing by the board of the Inspectorate.
Det var jo helt, det var så bok havresekk er for lite her, ikke sant? Det var jo... Det var jo helt vilt.
But the investigation took its time.
Så begynte jeg å mase etter at vi hadde vært der på hvordan går med rapporten. Faktisk i flere år. Og jeg fikk jo høre at nei, det var all verdens forklaring på at dette her ikke var ferdig og bla 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 og greier. Og til slutt så ga jeg.
Finally, in 1989, 10 years after the commission started their work, Warloe got to see the report. It had been completed 6 years earlier. The conclusion was based on medical experts that stated that David Hoover died of CO2 poisoning. And the permission to dive without emergency gas was no problem, as it would only have given 2 seconds of breathing gas.
Dette kunne de ikke vise til oss. De visste jo at å komme dragende med 2 sekunders kapasitet på bailout og dette greiene her, som jeg da så, det kunne ikke de servere til oss. Det kunne de ikke si til oss. Men det måtte de skrive for å frikjenne arbeidstilsynet.
It is this paragraph Jan Warloe now discover has been changed. Some text has been removed and new added. The paragraph refers to what the medical experts told the commission. Jens Smith-Sivertsen was one of these experts, with experience from both the military and oil companies. He has, however, always meant the cause of death was gas cut and not CO2 poisoning.
I og med at vi vet at det var et gasskutt under dykket, og at den andre dykkeren som da kom seg inn i sveisehabitat følte trang til å ta av seg maske fordi han ikke fikk pust, så vil jeg tro at det er den mest sannsynlige årsaken.
This is also what Smith-Sivertsen and his colleague told the commission in 1979. That is in the minutes from their meeting with the commission. But in the final report they are quoted differently. According to the report, Jens Smith-Sivertsen said David Hoover died of CO2 poisoning.
Det I hvert fall ikke noe sannsynlig.
He's also supposed to have said that the emergency gas was unnecessary because it would only last for 2 seconds.
Nei, det jo bare tull. Så har jeg vits med fra gassflasken I dag, det skal være I 2 sekunder. Det bare tull.
But according to the report, this is what he told the commission.
Der har noen fikset på det, altså. Eller tilføyd noe som ikke vi har sagt.
He has never seen the report until now.
Hva tenker du om det?
Nei, det finnes jo sånn litt nifst ut, for å si det rett ut. Ja.
Det en offisiell granskingsrapport.
Ja.
Børre Pettersen was the chairman of the commission. He was present during the meeting with the medical experts and signed the final report. We show him both the minutes and the final report.
Og så det der referatet fra det møtet. Men de sier jo stikk motsatt, at du ikke kan si at det CO2.
Ja, men altså akkurat rundt det husker jeg ikke det, altså.
Nei.
Nei. Men hele det feltet vi nå inne på, det jo et dykkemedisinsk felt.
Ja. Nei, for vi har jo vist det til legene som var på det møtet, og de kjenner seg ikke igjen I sluttrapporten. Altså, de har aldri sagt det, så de lurte litt på hvorfor det var kommet inn.
Nei, altså det kan ikke jeg svare på det. Kan ikke svare på det. Det eneste jeg kan si, det at ettergranskningsutvalget har I hvert fall ikke funnet opp en dødsårsak. Det kan jeg si, med 100% sikkerhet. For det var ingen som satt I det ettergranskningsutvalget som hadde kompetanse på dykkemedisin. Så når det står I vår rapport, så må det være basert på et medisinsk utgangspunkt. Altså. For vi har ikke funnet opp det. Det ville vært helt håpløst om man skulle sitte I et ettergranskningsutvalg og så finne opp en dødsårsak. Jeg mener det, ja. Det hadde, for å si det på godt norsk, vært rimelig dumt. Ja.
Det var en ting til fra det møtet der. Hvis du ser liksom på det nederste...
Konklusjon?
Ja, så står det at legene sa det at surstoffet ville bare vare I 2 sekunder.
Ja.
Det står heller ikke I referatet.
Nei, men jeg har samme svar på det. Jeg har ingen formening om på hvilket grunnlag den står der, bortsett fra at det I hvert fall ikke noe vi har funnet opp I ettergranskningsutvalget.
The chairman of the commission cannot explain why the medical experts were quoted incorrectly. But he admits it was unfortunate for the Labour Inspectorate to investigate itself.
Men habilitet var ingen debatt den gangen, altså på det området der. Nei, det var ikke det. Men når du sier det sånn som du sier det nå, nemlig at det her skal et ettergranskningsutvalg som nedsatt av arbeidstilsynets styre, for det arbeidstilsynets styre som nedsatte det utvalget, skal sitte da og granske, jeg må på å si, underordnede I en etat som en selv på en måte sitter som en del av. Jeg ser det poenget der, men det var ikke noe debatt den gangen. Det var det ikke. I dag hadde det nok vært det.
The Norwegian divers got no answer to what happened during the dive. They had experienced similar things before.
Det gikk år etter år etter år, med ulykke etter ulykke etter ulykke, før noe skjedde. Og vi ble mer og mer forbannet, og ville ha sikkerhetsregler på plass. Vi ville ha utdanning, denne skolen her, og ikke minst at de etterforsket dødsfall. Skikkelig. Det gikk over lik.
De ville jo prøve å overtale politikerne våre på Stortinget om at de måtte godkjenne at de kunne legge rørledningen over Norskeren. Så alt som var negativ karakter, det ble det lagt lokk på sannsynligvis.
In the North Sea, the Fjord field was in full production. The Minister of Oil was happy.
Når jeg tenker tilbake på hva som virkelig skjedde med hele denne utbyggingen, og hvilken enorm betydning det har hatt for det norske samfunn og for enkeltmennesker, så det sannelig god betaling for litt ubehagelige opplevelser.
And when a report from the commission appeared, the first pipeline across the Norwegian trench was already laid.
At norsk olje og gass skulle til lands hos oss,
det ikke bare drøm lenger.
The oil adventure had begun, ensuring Norway a new role in the Cold War. The Americans needed Norway in order to put the Soviet Union out of the game.
Heller ikke når det gjelder gass må man bli for avhengig av leveranser fra en kilde, og slett ikke fra den mulige militære fienden. Etter at Reagan overtok i USA i 1980, ble det politiske korstoget mot Sovjetunionen intensivert.
This classified document shows how Ronald Reagan and his administration worked to persuade Europe to say no to gas from the Soviet Union and instead buy from Norway. The American president was in luck. When pipelines could be laid and repaired in the deep, a major hindrance had been conquered. For officially, the American divers had succeeded. And the death was considered an accident caused by David Hoover himself. So why did John Cole end up with the blame in the USA? At the Hoover house, David has found his mother's diary.
She had wrote it like she was talking to my father, I think just to, of course, deal with the loss. They're all home now with their families, and what we do have, nothing but memories. This particular entry is dealing with Mr. Cole. That's when he came by. Looks like he brought his wife. John and Maggie Cole came out. I'm not sure, but something missing, or maybe I'm imagining it.
I don't think I'll get the truth unless you tell me. What am I after? Some secret that they're all hiding? Why can't I just accept it, what they're saying? Maybe he wanted to tell me his side.
I guess she is kind of looking at John Cole as that he had made a mistake and that my father could have been saved.
If Taylor hadn't been so careless, you'd still be here. They took you from me, and you'll never be replaced.
Even before they left Norway, John Cole realized something was wrong.
I knew that Taylor wanted to try to blame it on me somehow, and I was very concerned about that.
The diving company wanted no attention paid to the massive technical problems and breaches of safety procedures. Taylor Diving claimed David Hoover was only unconscious from CO2 when John Cole found him. That he should have opened a valve giving free flow of gas to Hoover's mask before he dragged him back to the bell. But there was gas in the mask. John Cole saw that immediately.
He used to free flow his mask so that there was always circulation within his mask. So when I found him, there was bubbles coming out of his mask. And at that point, I never thought to increase the flow because he had flow.
Either way, it was too late when he found him.
He was frothing at the mouth. His face was very flush. There was blood coming out of his nose and his mouth. When I grabbed his foot and shook him and looked in his eyes, I knew he was gone.
In New Orleans, lawyer Harvey Lewis prepared the compensation case for the Hoover family. For him, it was important to clear David Hoover from blame. One explanation could be that John Cole panicked.
Because one of the pre-terminal responses to a CO2 buildup is an intoxication-like state that causes you to do irrational things like take your mask off or fail to comply with a specific directive as this other diver did when he failed to open the valve to allow the gases to ventilate.
Here, Dr. Calder's alternative autopsy report became significant. He testified that body temperature, fear and heavy work caused CO2 poisoning in both divers, and therefore Cole did not behave normally.
So I certainly would not have intuitively known those things, nor would I have been able to read them in books or anything of that sort. So I have to attribute that information to Dr. Calder.
Dr. Calder's statement clears both the diving company and David Hoover of all blame. The family was convinced John Cole could have saved their father.
The carbon dioxide would have been evacuated from his helmet, and Mr. Hoover would be alive today.
But then new information emerged. The gas operator that controlled the supply of breathing gas to the divers changed his statement and admitted that one of the gas pumps failed. Taylor Diving now risked focus on technical problems, breach of the safety procedures and liability. They immediately offered to settle the case, but the reason was not disclosed. For the family, John Cole was still to blame, that his panic contributed to their father's death.
Deep down, I never felt it was my fault.
In Cambridge, Dr. Calder still takes assignments as a pathology expert. He has never forgotten this case, as he no longer can stand by his old conclusion.
It's not carbon dioxide, I think.
After the autopsy and testimony, he started to doubt his own theory.
I think CO2 was an interesting concept because it was a nice bit of physiology. But then I thought you would go back and reflect about these things, and then I thought, no, this doesn't quite add up. It must be something that's caused a sudden problem of lack of oxygen. Yeah. Like that, yeah.
Dr. Calder emphasised that he was an independent pathologist, even though he interpreted the autopsy and testified for Taylor Diving.
Did you know that the official cause of death in Norway, I mean, not from the autopsy report, but from the investigation, is that he died of CO2? That's the official version.
I did hear that. Yes.
What do you think of that?
I think in retrospect that's probably wrong.
Did you ever think about contacting anyone in Norway and saying, listen, I've changed my mind?
No one asked me, so I didn't put my head above the parapet. Rightly or wrongly.
Men hvorfor er det John Cole skyld i USA?
You become the scapegoat.
There was nothing John Cole could have done to save David Hoover. But what has this done to those who have lived with another truth for all these years? In the kitchen outside New Orleans, new pieces fall into place. Little sister Kylie is also here. She was not born when her father died.
What is this stuff, David?
She knows nothing about this story, but now gets to read and learn.
Is that him?
It's a letter, yeah. That's him.
The three children never knew what their father did in Norway. The information film from Norsk Hydro makes them understand.
Like being in space.
Mm-hmm. There's Dad.
Wow.
Oh my God, I haven't seen these faces in a long time.
Under arbeidet med å tette rørene skjedde det en ulykke hvor en dykker omkom. Og Norsk Hydro og Statoil besluttet å trekke seg fra forsøket. All dykkeaktivitet ble stanset, mens årsakene til ulykken ble etterforsket.
First time I ever saw Dad on video.
Mm-hmm.
Actually.
I hope his kids are doing well. I really do. I hope the best for him. I know growing up without a father was probably pretty difficult. But unfortunately, I was the last one to see him alive. He waved goodbye. See you in the bill.
The Hoovers make up their minds. They want to meet John Cole. "37 years later.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Glad to finally meet you.
Yeah, I'm so glad you came over.
Dave, John. Glad to meet you, sir.
Kylie.
You're Kylie? Okay, I'm sorry. And you're Jennifer.
Hi, Maggie. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you. My wife, Maggie.
Very long time. Yes, it is.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Can we go inside and sit down, please?
Yes, sir.
We really appreciate it. So what do you do?
I'm actually an architect.
And what do you do, Jennifer?
Paralegal, Kylie.
Oh, are you? I'm sorry.
That's okay. We kind of look alike. No, you look older.
I'm older. Come on now. I'm sorry. And what do you do, Jennifer?
I was teaching martial arts in Orlando.
Well, I'm glad to hear you're doing all well. Great.
Yeah.
I'm sorry we're here to talk about something unfortunate, but I wanted to basically explain to you what happened that day.
What did Taylor tell you all that happened?
Your dad went down with a diver that wasn't really experienced. The other diver panicked, and the people up top were worried about him because he was panicking and basically didn't even think about your dad, and your dad drowned. That was the story. Are you okay to talk about what happened? Because
Sure.
I'd like to hear what you had to say.
I will be more than happy to. It just might take me a while to get through it, but no problem. I brought this. I don't know. Have you ever seen this? And then at that point, we lost gas. So I said, well, hey, I'm in air. So I took my hat off. So I get to the top of the spot, and I'm heading back, and I see my hose get stuck again.
You need to go find
Dave.
Yeah.
Well, they're trying to, go find Dave, or Dave respond. So all of a sudden, I see his foot. I just grab his foot, pull him to me, shake him, look in his eyes, and he's gone. I mean, I just hate to say it, but there was nothing there.
I mean, John said he tried his best to get him back as fast as he could.
Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, I know growing up without a dad it was pretty rough. I'm finding out, just like you, a lot more that Taylor really did cover quite a bit up.
Oh, yeah.
So I know it's kind of late to do anything about it, but I'm sorry.
Yeah, but at least we know now. We found letters that my dad would write to my mom. So I started reading them, and it's just been the best thing. It's to know that he knew me was just wonderful, because I don't know him. So I'm glad you guys are here and that this got started.
He thought you were fat. That was all he kept saying. That's all he kept saying in the letters. My big, beautiful girl and my rolling toady. But I haven't read the letters. I'm going off of what she's told me. There was a lot of other stuff I didn't want to read.
I'm sure.
Every letter seems to deal with sex.
Yeah.
Every letter.
The dive made the laying of pipelines possible. Oil and gas came ashore, and Norway became one of the wealthiest nations in the world. Officially, the dive was a success. But the authorities and oil companies knew this was not completely true. Through the 80s, a series of experimental dives took place at the research institute Knudssøn in Bergen. Oil companies and scientists tried to find methods for diving safely to 300 meters and deeper. On every dive, people were injured. At the end of the 80s, Norwegian authorities knew that dives to such depths were unsafe. But by then the first pipelines were already laid. They are there thanks to 10 American divers in a project that was deemed a success.
Well,
From an oil field standpoint, I guess it was a success. From a personal standpoint and from a diver's side, no, it was not a success because I was hurt and another friend died. When a friend of mine dies, I don't consider that a success.
It's very hard because you, on one hand, you want to be proud of what you did. And how do you tell, excuse me. On one hand, you want to be very proud of what you did. But on the other hand, whenever you talk about it, when you want to talk about it, you always think of Dave.